Hello, my amazing tribe. I'm excited to connect with you through this video. Welcome, everyone, to our latest video where we'll be exploring Arhat. In Buddhism, an Arhat Sanskrit or arahant Pali is one who has gained insight into the true nature of existence and has achieved Nirvana and liberated from the endless cycle of rebirth, one who has no spirit or anattā and ended all of their own suffering. The understanding of the concept has changed over the centuries and varies between different schools of Buddhism and different regions. A range of views on the attainment of arhats existed in the early Buddhist schools. The Sarvāstivāda, Kāśyapīya, Mahāsāṃghika, Ekavyāvahārika, Lokottaravāda, Bahuśrutīya, Prajñaptivāda, and Caitika schools all regarded arhats as imperfect in their attainments compared to Buddhas. Mahayana Buddhist teachings urge followers to take up the path of a Bodhisattva and to not fall back to the level of arhats and śrāvakas. The arhats, or at least the senior arhats, came to be widely regarded by Theravada Buddhists as moving beyond the state of personal freedom to join the Bodhisattva enterprise in their own way. Mahayana Buddhism regarded a group of 18 arhats with names and personalities as awaiting the return of the Buddha as Maitreya, while other groupings of 6, 8, 16, 100, and 500 also appear in tradition and Buddhist art, especially in East Asia called Luhan or Loan. They may be seen as the Buddhist equivalents of the Christian saint, apostles, or early disciples and leaders of the faith. In this part of the video, we'll be diving deep into etymology and unraveling its profound impact. The Sanskrit word arhant is a present participle coming from the verbal root ya to deserve. Are meriting, deserving, ahaya having a claim, being entitled, arhat a past participle honored, worshipped. The word is used in the Veda with this sense of deserving. With that being said, let's now move on to in early Buddhist schools. In pre-Buddhist India, the term arhat denoting a saintly person in general was closely associated with miraculous power and asceticism. Buddhists made a sharp distinction between their arhats and Indian holy men, and miraculous powers were no longer central to arhat identity or mission. A range of views on the relative perfection of arhats existed in the early Buddhist schools. Mahāsāṃghikas, such as the Ekavyāvahārika, Lokottaravāda, Bahuśrutīya, Prajñaptivāda, and Caitika schools, advocated the transcendental nature of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the fallibility of arhats. The Caitikas advocated the ideal of the Bodhisattva Bodhisattvana over that of the arhat Ivakana, and viewed arhats as fallible and still subject to ignorance. According to Ekavyāvahārika, the Sarvāstivādas held the same position as the Mahāsāṃghika branch about arhats, considering them imperfect and fallible. In the Sarvāstivāda Sutra, the demon takes the form of Nirdhata's father and tries to convince Nirdhata, who was a bhikkhu, to work toward the lower stage of arhat rather than strive to become a fully enlightened Buddha Samyaksambuddha. In her reply, Nirdhata rejects arhat as a lower path. A Buddha's wisdom is like empty space of the 10 quarters, which can enlighten innumerable people. But an arhat's wisdom is inferior. The Kāśyapīya school also believed that arhats were fallible and imperfect, similar to the view of the Sarvāstivādas and the Mahāsāṃghika sects. The Kāśyapīyans believed that arhats have not fully eliminated desire, their perfection is incomplete, and it is possible for them to relapse. Let's now enter the realm of Theravada Buddhism and discover the fascinating stories it has to tell. In Theravada Buddhism, an arahant is a person who has eliminated all the unwholesome roots which underlie the fetters, who upon their death will not be reborn in any world, since the fetters that bind a person to samsara have been finally dissolved. In the Pali canon, the word tathagata is sometimes used as a synonym for arhat, though the former usually refers to the Buddha alone. After attainment of nirvana, the 5 aggregates physical forms, feelings, sensations, perception, mental formations, and consciousness will continue to function, sustained by physical bodily vitality. This attainment is termed the nirvana element with a residue remaining. But once the arhat passes away and with the disintegration of the physical body, the 5 aggregates will cease to function, hence ending all traces of existence in the phenomenal world and thus total release from the misery of samsara. It would then be termed the nirvana element without residue remaining. Parinirvana occurs at the death of an arhat. In Theravada Buddhism, the Buddha himself is first identified as an arhat, as are his enlightened followers, because they are free from all defilements, existing without greed, hatred, delusion, ignorance, and craving. Lacking assets which will lead to future birth, the arhat knows and sees the real here and now. This virtue shows stainless purity, true worth, and the accomplishment of the end, Nirvana. In the Pali canon, Ananda states that he knows monastics to achieve Nirvana in one of four ways. So one develops insight preceded by serenity. Pali. One develops serenity preceded by insight. One develops serenity and insight in a stepwise fashion. One's mind becomes seized by excitation about the Dhamma and, as a consequence, develops serenity and abandons the fetters. For those that have destroyed greed and hatred in the sensory context with some residue of delusion, are called anagami non-returner. Anagamists will not be reborn into the human world after death, but into the heaven of the pure bodhis, where only anagamists live. There, they will attain full enlightenment. The Theravadian commentator Bhagavata placed the arhat at the completion of the path to liberation. Now, let's shift our perspective and explore in Mahayana Buddhism from a different angle. Mahayana Buddhists see Gautama Buddha himself as the ideal towards which one should aim in one's spiritual aspirations. A hierarchy of general attainments is envisioned, with the attainments of arhats and Prajñaptivādas being clearly separate from and below those of Sankhya or Tathagatas such as Gautama Buddha. In contrast to the goal of becoming a fully enlightened Buddha, the path of ekavyāvahārika in being motivated by seeking personal liberation from sushra is often portrayed as selfish and undesirable. There are even some Mahayana texts that regard the aspiration to arhatship and personal liberation as an outside path. Instead of aspiring for arhatship, Mahayanans are urged to instead take up the path of the Bodhisattva and to not fall back to the level of arhats and ekavyāvaharas. Therefore, it is taught that an arhat must go on to become a Bodhisattva eventually. If they fail to do so in the lifetime in which they reach the attainment, they will fall into a deep sandy of emptiness, thence to be roused and taught the Bodhisattva path, presumably when ready. According to the Lotus Sutra, any true arhat will eventually accept the Mahayana path. Mahayana teachings often consider the ekavyāvahārika path to be motivated by fear of sushra, which renders them incapable of aspiring to Buddhahood, and that they therefore lack the courage and wisdom of a Bodhisattva. Novice Bodhisattvas are compared to ekavyāvaharas and arhats at times. There is an account of 60 novice Bodhisattvas who attain arhatship despite themselves and their efforts at the Bodhisattva path because they lacked the abilities of Prajñaptivāda and skillful means to progress as Bodhisattvas toward complete enlightenment. This is because they are still viewed as having innate attachment and fear of sushra. That compares these people to a giant bird without wings that cannot help but plummet to the earth from the top of Sumeru. Mahayana Buddhism has viewed the ekavyāvahārika path culminating in arhatship as a lesser accomplishment than complete enlightenment, but still accords due respect to arhats for their respective achievements. Therefore, Buddha realms are depicted as populated by both ekavyāvaharas and Bodhisattvas. Far from being completely disregarded, the accomplishments of arhats are viewed as impressive, essentially because they have transcended the mundane world. Chinese Buddhism and other East Asian traditions have historically accepted this perspective, and specific groups of arhats are venerated as well, such as the 16 arhats, the 18 arhats, and the 500 arhats. The first famous portraits of these arhats were painted by the Chinese monk Ganyu in 891 CE. He donated these portraits to Shenjian Temple in Shintang, modern Hangzhou, where they are preserved with great care and ceremonious respect. In some respects, the path to arhatship and the path to complete enlightenment are seen as having common grounds. However, a distinctive difference is seen in the Mahayana doctrine pushing emotional and cognitive non-attachment to their logical consequences. Of this, Paul Williams writes that in Mahayana Buddhism, nirvana must be sought without being sought for oneself, and practice must be done without being practiced. The discursive mode of thinking cannot serve the basic purpose of attainment without attainment. As we venture forward, let's examine attainments in detail and gain a deeper appreciation for its significance. A range of views on the attainment of arhats existed in the early Buddhist schools. The Sarvāstivāda, Kāśyapīya, Mahāsāṃghika, Ekavyāvahārika, Lokottaravāda, Bahuśrutīya, Prajñaptivāda and Caitika schools all regarded arhats as being imperfect in their attainments compared to Buddhas. The Dharmaguptaka sect believed that the Buddha and those of the two vehicles, although they have one and the same liberation, have followed different noble paths. The Mahāsāṃghika and the Theravada regarded arhats and Buddhas as being similar to one another. The 5th century Theravadian commentator Buddhaghosa regarded arhats as having completed the path to enlightenment. According to Bhikkhu Bodhi, the P canon portrays the Buddha declaring himself to be an arahant. According to Bhikkhu Bodhi, Nirvana is the ultimate goal, and one who has attained Nirvana has attained arhatship. Bhikkhu Bodhi writes, the defining mark of an arahant is the attainment of Nirvana in this present life. The Mahayana discerned a hierarchy of attainments, with samiks and buddhas at the top, Bodhisattvas below that, pratika buddhas below that, and arhats further below. But what was it that distinguished the Bodhisattva from the śrāvakas, and ultimately the Buddha from the arhat? The difference lay, more than anywhere else, in the altruistic orientation of the Bodhisattva. Now, let's redirect our focus towards translations and discover its significance in our narrative. The term arhat is often rendered in English as arhat. The term arhat was transliterated into some East Asian languages phonetically, for example, the Chinese luanch, often shortened to simply luanch. This may appear in English as luhan or loan. In Japanese, the pronunciation of the same Chinese characters is reikinyo, or arkinyo. The Tibetan term for arhat was translated by meaning from Sanskrit. This translation, Tgrubkumpa, means one who has destroyed the foes of afflictions. Thus the Tibetan translators also understood the meaning of arhat to be arihanta. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel.